Good afternoon, everybody. Appreciate your patience. We had bill hearings and voting session. Want to welcome everybody to the Capital Budget Subcommittee on Budget and Taxation. We're meeting today for the purpose of budget hearings. Just wanted to remind folks, thank you for wearing your mask, but also for those folks that are signed up as witnesses that are not connected to the agency, you'll be allotted 2.5 minutes. I do try to run a tight ship, so I will remind you when your time is up. For people that are interested, I just wanted to go over the order for today. We'll start with the Department of Aging, then the Department of Natural Resources, then the Interagency Commission on School Construction, Department of Housing and Community Development, and then the Maryland Department of Emergency Management. As we have done in all our budget hearings, we'll start off with the analysis and then the agency response. So with that, we'll start out with Grace Peterson for the Department of Aging.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's my pleasure to present the Department of Aging's fiscal 2023 capital analysis. The Department of Aging has one capital grant program, the Senior Center Capital Grant Program, and it's requested for $2.4 million GEO bond authorization in fiscal 2023. This is $800,000 above what was anticipated in the CIP. And each program, all of the funding will support expanded programming space in senior centers that are also anticipating an increased aging population in their jurisdiction. So you can see in Exhibit 1, a lot of the senior centers in the state are concentrated in the Baltimore to DC corridor, which also houses the majority of aging residents. Looking at Exhibit 2, this is a summary of each capital project that is proposed in fiscal 2023. Each is funded at the statutory maximum for this this program. Projects funded, senior centers that receive funding through the Senior Center Capital Grant Program can receive a maximum of $800,000 for a 15-year period. After 15 years, that funding ceiling lapses. So there are 3 projects funded in one in each Queen Anne's, Baltimore County, and then Calvert County. Exhibit 3 shows the status of projects authorized in prior years, and what's notable is that even projects dating back to 2015 have not expended their authorized funds, and one project in particular, the Harford Road Senior Center, has seen delays as the original grantee that was proposed to carry out this project. The Baltimore City is no longer contracting with that grantee, and they're taking the project on themselves. So the department plans to, after plans are revised for that project in particular, MDOA plans to bring that project before BPW when the finalized plans are available. So DLS has one observation to discuss, and it's increasing investments in the intergenerational model of community centers that also serve seniors. So the department's indicated in their prior requests that intergenerational centers offer a number of benefits, such as removing stigma that some may feel by visiting standalone senior centers, and also offering opportunities for seniors to engage with other ages within their community. And it also makes financing the creation of programming space more feasible as it serves a wider population. So looking at Exhibit 4, what's notable about the state's investments in intergenerational centers is that over 80% of the investment in intergenerational centers has been through bond initiatives instead of coming through the Senior Center Capital Grant Program. As you can see on page 9, this kind of discusses what's going on with those investments. So basically, there is requirements for the Senior Center Capital Grant Program that aren't put in place for bond initiatives. And the Senior Center Capital Grant Program offers a number of benefits that are bulleted here for oversight. So as more investments are coming through bond initiatives instead of the Senior Center Capital Grant Program, their oversight is limited in these projects, but state investments are not. One reason for this could be the $800,000 funding ceiling for each project. So DLS recommends that consideration be given to potentially increasing that funding ceiling for this program. So that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much for that very thorough analysis. Any subcommittee members have a question? Seeing none, thank you very much. We'll now have the agency come up. Ms. Adele, thank you for being here. Just to note, Secretary Kramer's a constituent of mine. I see here that it's just concur, so if there's any, we have your written testimony. Is there anything else that you want to add to what the analyst said in your written response?
No, we just want to thank you for the opportunity to be here. Thank Ms. Pedersen for her in-depth analysis and taking the interest in the Senior Center project. We do appreciate that. But otherwise, if you have any questions.
Thank you very much. Is there any questions? Thank you. Please tell the secretary I said hello.
And she sends her regards.
With that, we'll turn now to the Department of Natural Resources. Andrew Gray will kick us off, and then we'll hear the agency response. Mr. Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the Department of Natural Resources capital budget discussion here, 11 projects for fiscal '23. In terms of the recommended actions, the $6.2 million general fund appropriation for the Natural Resources Police Replacement Helicopter, DLS is recommending deleting that funding. In terms of the GEO bond recommended actions, DLS is recommending approving all of them noted there. Exhibit 1 reflects the transfer tax. It's a big portion of the Department of Natural Resources capital program, PAYGO program. Really briefly here, the regular allocation provides around $283 million. So that's already an increase in revenues relative to last year. There's also the overattainment from fiscal '21. So that's additional revenues that were received in '21 than were expected. That's then applied 2 years later to fiscal '23. So that's $48.5 million reflected there. And finally, there's a repayment in the dedicated purpose account for the transfer tax repayment plan. It's an additional $30.5 million. So a substantial amount of money available, $362 million for fiscal '23 for the programs noted here. Exhibit 2 reflects the transfer tax revenue estimates. You see the orange bar increasing over the years relative to the blue bar. It means we're more optimistic revenue scenarios. Moving outwards, with the exception of 2027, it looks like it declines a little bit in the out year there. Exhibit 3 basically just shows that with increasing revenues, you have additional funding for the programs noted. Exhibit 4 reflects the program open space fund balances for the program open space state and local. And just like to note here, the unobligated funding, $113.2 million, simply reflects money that has not been programmed for a particular project. Does not mean that's free and clear funding in the sense you could transfer all of that, for instance. But that is the overall structure of the POS balances at this point. Exhibit 5 reflects the kind of overall CIP for Department of Natural Resources programs. Just like to point out here, the general funds, the very top in fiscal '23, that's for the helicopter and for the critical maintenance program. In terms of Exhibit 6, the big picture, Program Open Space Land Acquisition Local Program experiences an increase due to the general special funds and the repayment funding and the dedicated purpose account. In terms of other major changes you see here, Oyster Restoration Program receives a certain amount of additional funding. We'll talk a little bit more about that. The Local Parks and Playgrounds Infrastructure Program budgeted $85 million in general obligation bonds for the 2 years. And finally, the Natural Resources Police Helicopter Replacement Project, around $6.2 million increase between fiscal '22 and fiscal '23. In terms of the Critical Maintenance Program, there are two components, main components of the funding. There's the Transfer Tax Special Funds, around $12.6 million. There's also $25 million in general funds as part of the $100 million in general funds budget in the dedicated purpose account. So this is a substantial increase relative even to the generous amount that was provided for last year by the General Assembly. In terms of the Oyster Restoration Program, $13.6 million in general obligation bond funding for this purpose. And just big picture look here, Harris Creek is done. The Little Choptank River, Tres Avon, Upper St. Mary's River are experiencing second-year class seedings of oyster spat. And the Minokan River is the big work being done going forward. In terms of the Local Parks and Playgrounds Infrastructure Program, once again, $85 million from fiscal '22 and fiscal '23, structured slightly differently. The $85 million in fiscal '22 was provided for by the General Assembly and was provided to individual jurisdictions at set amounts, up to $10 million for the two largest jurisdictions. The $85 million in the governor's budget for fiscal '23 provides for around almost $10 million for 15 projects, and the remaining $75 million or so is to be allocated based on applications received by the Department of Natural Resources. In terms of how we're doing with the fiscal '22 funding, around $46.8 million has been encumbered, and the idea was that this is for project, shovel-ready projects, so that's exciting. We're moving quickly with this funding. There are still around $38.2 million still needs to be encumbered. This is through February 16th. There are around 6 jurisdictions that have not encumbered any of their funding yet. 2 of those are in Montgomery County and Prince George's County, and the funding was required to be used for 2 particular projects. So big picture there. One thing I thought was interesting was Frederick County has really the most number of projects that have come out. And Garrett County actually has the most equitable allocation across the different projects that it's funding. The Natural Resources Police Helicopter Replacement, $6.2 million in general funds, as we discussed. The idea is here to replace what I understand now is a 52-year-old Bell OH-58 helicopter with an Airbus H-125M helicopter. The idea being for using this for maritime homeland security, conservation enforcement, and search and rescue operations. The idea is that Department of Natural Resources explains that this helicopter would be much more efficient than using the Maryland State Police's helicopter, $6,000 per hour relative to what they're thinking, at least for their current helicopters, around $510 per hour to operate. And therefore, in theory, this is a cost savings if we're using less of the State Police's helicopter work for these purposes and more of this particular new helicopter we're talking about. However, DLS notes the Natural Resource Police Aviation Unit was effectively abolished by the Board of Public Works Cost Containment Actions in July 2020. There was some still special funds and federal funds, from what I understand, to be used for that purpose, but largely, at least that cost containment action reflected the actions at that time, which was to abolish the unit. In addition, it does not appear to be any detrimental effects as a result of having the helicopter down for 6 months due to procurement concerns relative to parts. Therefore, Department of Legislative Services recommends that the old or existing helicopter be decommissioned and the funding for the Natural Resources Replacement helicopter be deleted. The one issue in this analysis concerns the Maryland Park Service enhancements in the fiscal '23 budget. Little background, State Park Investment Commission met last fall. Thank you, Senator Zucker, Senator Edwards, and Senator Elfreth for your contributions and excellent work on that commission. The commission came up with a number of recommendations now being applied to the Great Maryland Outdoors Act, Senate Bill 541 and HB 727, 2022. This lays out kind of exhaustively what this means for the capital program. I will just stick to the one idea of reducing the critical maintenance backlog in state parks by fiscal the end of July 1, 2026 is the idea. So at the end of fiscal 26 or so, try to really get that critical maintenance backlog down to 0. One of the considerations here, though, is that backlog is around $64.8 million. And it's going to take a lot of work, not just funding, but obviously operations work as well for DNR to be able to kind of bring down that level of backlog. DNR will need to focus more of its efforts on inventorying and managing its assets, for instance, and asset management system being really important. DLS recommends that DNR comment on its ability to eliminate the critical maintenance backlog by that date and the steps that it's taking toward improving its asset management. Unless there are any questions, that concludes the presentation.
Mr. Gray, thank you. Any questions for the analyst? Seeing none, thank you. Thank you for all your hard work on this. Madam Secretary, come on up. Secretary Jeannie Hadaway-Riccio, good to see you. If you just want to introduce your team, and then if you can respond to the analyst's comments, please. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, and good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today on behalf of the Maryland Department of Natural Resources. For the record, Jeannie Hadaway-Riccio, Secretary of the Department. With me today is Alan Fisher, our Deputy Secretary. We also have Bunky Leffman, our Legislative Director, and members of our budget team here with us today. I want to start by thanking the Department of Legislative Services and Mr. Gray for all of his work and the analysis, and we do appreciate the opportunity to respond to the findings and the recommendations. So beginning with the PAYGO recommendations, we strongly oppose the recommendation to delete the $6.2 million general fund appropriation for a replacement helicopter. The July 1 Board of Public Works decision was made in the middle of an unprecedented pandemic when revenue estimates were projected to be much lower. But once greater revenues were realized, our unit was back up and operational within 3 months. As many of the committee members here today know, we have operated an aviation unit for 60 years with the Natural Resources Police. As Mr. Gray mentioned, our current helicopter is 52 years old. It was built in 1970. and it's already exceeded its life expectancy. In fact, Bell Helicopter no longer supports the frame or even manufactures parts for that aviation unit. So as you can see from the written testimony that we submitted to the committee, the primary objectives of the new aviation unit would be consistent with our current mission, which includes search and rescue services, enforcement of natural resources laws, serving as a lead agency for maritime homeland security on state waterways. And, just a reminder to the committee how vast our jurisdiction is. We have 7,700 miles of shoreline from the Chesapeake Bay to the Atlantic coast and every waterway in between, plus over 500,000 acres of land that are state-owned, not to mention the entire stretch of the state when it comes to fulfilling these missions. So I would also just mention that there absolutely would be consequences to not having this aviation unit. It is one of the most important components of Natural Resources Police and our mission. There has been evidence that enforcement has been down without the unit in the air. And also going back to things like search and rescue, we cannot and we should not rely on Maryland State Police, who is trying to fulfill a medevac unit to serve our mission as well. So we would respectfully request that the committee reject that recommendation and retain the funding for the helicopter replacement. The department concurs with PAYGO recommendations 2, 3, and 4 and asks the committee to support those recommendations. We also concur with all 4 GO bond recommended actions and ask you to support those as well. Regarding recommendation number 2 for GO bonds, I did want to point out that we are working with the Department of Budget and Management on amendments to fine-tune the LPPI language to ensure that the eligibility criteria for the program is consistent with last year's program, as well as program Open Space Local. Finally, DLS asked us to comment on the critical maintenance backlog. We're extremely grateful for the governor's leadership in allocating $37.6 million in critical maintenance funding for FY23, and we believe that this amount will significantly help us address the backlog of projects and is also consistent with the workload that we can reasonably achieve. Our engineering and construction unit is filling vacancies and will be fully staffed by this fall. And once we're fully staffed, we will be accelerating our achievement of addressing that backlog. I would just point out that given the fact that projects are constantly added to the list and the uncertainty that can occur in procurement and construction activities, there is no way that we could guarantee that the entire backlog is going to be eliminated by July 1, 2026, but we do believe that it will be significantly reduced by then. We're also in the planning stages with the Maryland Department of General Services to utilize a statewide contract for a computerized maintenance management system, also known as CMIS. That will create a detailed inventory of DNR facilities, our maintenance history on those facilities, and any future needs. So again, we would ask for the committee's support in retaining funding for these important programs. We thank you again for the opportunity to testify today, and we're happy to answer any questions you may have.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Secretary. Any questions for the Secretary? Senator Elfreth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Madam Secretary. As someone who represents a waterfront district, and I know Senator Eckert shares concerns that we do our utmost in search and rescue. So, and a 52-year-old helicopter makes me very nervous. I can't imagine how nervous it makes you. Where, if we were to reject the cut and fund a new helicopter, where would that be located, number one? And number two, you've been utilizing a state police helicopter since the 2020 cut, or still utilizing the existing helicopter?
So we are still utilizing the existing helicopter, except for the times that it's down for maintenance, which is more often than not at this point. So in order to really be consistent with our federal partners and what we call planned and unplanned missions, right, when there's an emergency, it would be a lot more effective to have our own unit that's reliable. We currently occupy a hangar at the Easton Airport, which is centrally located to the state, and it would be our intention to remain at the Easton Airport hangar.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Madam Secretary, the $6.2 million, does that cover the full cost of the helicopter?
It does,
Okay.
yes.
Any other questions for the Secretary? Thank you very much, Madam Secretary. Colleagues, we do have some witnesses, so
Thank
thank you,
you.
Madam Secretary. We'll start off first with Eric Galley. Mr. Galley? Just a reminder that witnesses have 2.5 minutes, Mr. Galley, but we do want to hear what you have to say, so welcome.
Thank you very much. My name is Eric Galley, and I'm here today on behalf of the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, the Maryland League of Conservation Voters, and the Nature Conservancy. And they all, in general support of the DNR capital budget. And all of these organizations, and you have this, we submitted this general testimony that some of you have seen already, but hopefully we'll see today. And in there, it's kind of a wish list. We support the DNR budget, but we also understand that we have a surplus, and we have the federal infrastructure bill, and we have maybe still coming down the road a scaled-down version of Build Back Better that may have some environmental money. And we tried to get everybody together and ask them, what are the things that we need to do to finish the watershed implementation plan and to deal with climate change? So this is a little bit of a wish list, and you'll see it's basically just a supersizing of things that we already do. DNR does a great job doing oyster restoration. This proposes more money so they can do more oyster restoration. And again, this is a calculation by the scientists of what we need to do, and we're working closely with the Chesapeake Bay Commission and Senator Elfrith and others to try to figure out exactly what we need to do in the next 3 or 4 years. We think this is a good recommendation, and we trust you to fit them into the appropriate budgets, but we thought it was good to talk about oysters and some of these other things in this committee. So we thank you very much for the time, and if you have any questions or want to talk to us, we'd love to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Galley. Any questions from the committee? Okay, thank you very much. We have one more witness, Mel Poole with Friends of Maryland State Parks. Mr. Poole, you here? Perfect. Come on up. 2.5 minutes. Welcome.
Hi, Mel Poole representing Friends of Maryland State Parks. We are 5,000 volunteers and 40 partnership organizations annually contributing 200,000 hours valued at $5.7 million to the Maryland Park Service. These volunteers provide skills, training, expertise, and diversity to the state park workforce and serve as park advocates to surrounding park gateway communities. We advocate full funding for the governor's FY 2023 program open space appropriation. Please do not cut Maryland Park Service's critical maintenance and capital improvement budgets. These funding sources allow the Park Service to fulfill its mission of visitor enjoyment and resource protection for 75 state parks and 140,000 acres of public land. We support the governor's appropriation of $37.5 million for critical maintenance for the FY 2023 budget. But we don't see how these projects can be completed in a timely manner without increasing the staffing capacity of DNR's engineering and construction services and the Department of General Services Acquisition Services. For the FY 2023 budget, the backlog has grown to $76.6 million from $40 million in 2018, a 91.5% increase. Given the current inflation rate, we expect the backlog in real dollars will probably exceed $100 million. We also support the governor's appropriation of $30.2 million in the Natural Resources Development Fund for the capital improvements for the FY 2023 budget, although the funding remains inadequate given the existing infrastructure. In 2020, the federal government finally addressed its growing capital and facility maintenance backlog for national parks. We think Maryland needs to do the same for its state parks. State parks are a major contributor to the economy. In 2021, state parks generated $17 million in visitor fees, $25 for every $1 invested, and $1.3 billion in economic impact. We believe that state parks are a good investment and urge your full support for the DNR capital budget. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Any question for Mr. Poole? Okay, thank you very much. Colleagues, I just wanted to flag that about 7 or 8 other people had submitted favorable for this budget, but they did written. I just want to flag it for you. Okay, thank you very much. That concludes the budget hearing on natural resources. Is Mr. Grell here? Perfect, good. So we'll now move on to the Interagency Commission on School Construction. We'll start out with the analyst, Laura Hyde. Ms. Hyde, please start whenever you're ready.
Thank you. All right, we're going to be starting here on page 1. This is the capital budget summary, and this is the capital improvement program. So with the passage of Chapter 20 of 2020, the Built to Learn program, funding for school construction eclipses $1 billion for the second consecutive year. This funding includes 8 programs that receive a total of $222 million in GO bonds, $257 million in PAYGO general funds, $40 million in PAYGO federal funds, and then revenue bonds issued as part of the Built to Learn program. We're going to move to page 6. This is Exhibit 1. So this chart shows new school construction by source, not including revenue bonds applied to Built to Learn projects. The proposed budget uses almost equal amounts of PAYGO general funds and GO bonds as new school construction funds. The PAYGO federal funds are applied to the Healthy Schools Facility Fund, which receives $40 million in both fiscal 22 and 23. Looking at Exhibit 2, Chapter 14 established the Maryland General Assembly's intent that state school construction projects funding should annually meet or exceed $400 million. The intent of Chapter 14 is that programs such as Built to Learn and 21st Century Schools are intended to supplement, not supplant, state funding. And as programmed in the fiscal 2023 CIP, the state funding level falls short of this goal by approximately $100 million annually in fiscal 24, 25, and 26. This deficit is primarily due to funding allocated to the public school construction program, which in the governor's CIP is reduced in response to the planned issuance of Built to Learn bonds in these years. Looking at the public school construction program recommendations, in December 2021, the IAC made initial fiscal 2023 75% funding allocation recommendations totaling $156 million based on the governor's preliminary $208 million budget as outlined in his preliminary capital budget. But based on the proposed CIP in February 22, IAC revised these initial 75% allocations to $160 million and added $124 million as part of the 90% proposed allocation. The 100% recommendations here are preliminary and total the $285 million in the CIP, and allocations for 2023 cover approximately 47% of the requested funds for school construction. Now looking at Exhibit 5, this is the Enrollment Growth and Relocatable Classroom Supplement Grant Program, or EGRC. So the fiscal 2023 proposed budget provides the mandated $40 million for EGRC plus an additional $55.4 million. Starting in fiscal 22, Chapter 20 reduced the threshold for the 5-year average of relocatable classrooms from 300 to 250 for LEA eligibility and added an enrollment growth provision for any funding allowance over $40 million. So under this revised formula and with the increased funding in the proposed budget, 7 counties receive EGRC supplemental grants in fiscal 23 for a total of $95.4 million. Looking at Exhibit 6, this is the Healthy School Facilities Fund. The proposed fiscal 2023 allowance of $90 million for the Healthy School Facilities Fund exceeds the $40 million mandate established in Chapter 20, with $50 million in GO bonds and an additional $40 million in federal stimulus funds. Baltimore City receives 50% of any fund allowance, including the federal funds. Looking at page 7, this is Built to Learn bond issuances. Chapter 20 authorizes the Maryland Stadium Authority to issue bonds to finance school construction projects. The first series of bonds were issued in November 2021, and a second issuance is planned for March 2022. So currently, the IAC is planning for $608 million of this allowance, but this chart shows that MSA has projected that as much as $786 million could be available for school construction with these first 2 bond sales. And then looking at Exhibit 8 at the bottom of this page here, this is allowances and allocations. So using a projected allowance of $2 billion as of January 2022, approximately $395 million has been approved for Built to Learn projects in 6 counties. This projected allocation leaves approximately $1.6 billion for remaining projects, which will be dispersed based on the statutory percentages that are shown in this chart. Local governments must provide their local match for all Build to Learn projects, and the cost share percentages apply to the whole project, including planning, design and development, as well as furniture, fixtures, and equipment. And all projects must be approved by the IAC. Let's see, looking at Exhibit 9, this is Baltimore City bond issuances. So Chapter 647 of 2013 established a new partnership between the state, Baltimore City, and Baltimore City Public Schools to fund up to $1.1 billion in public school facility improvements through revenue bonds issued by MSA. A $974 million in par value has been issued to date, and according to MSA, there is an additional $126 million in capacity to issue bonds. So MSA plans on issuing new bonds early in calendar 2022 with a par value of $68 million, with plans that this will fund one additional school construction project. Exhibits 10, 11, 12, and 13 provide details on Aging Schools Program and the non-public Aging Schools Program, the Public Schools Safety Grant Program, and the Non-Public School Security Improvements Program. I want to note that in fiscal 2023 proposed budget, the public and non-public school safety grant programs do not receive funding in the capital budget, but they receive a total of $13.5 million in general funds in the operating budget. If you look at Exhibit 14, this graph shows the statewide average deviation of the age of school buildings, starting with a statewide average of 24 years old in fiscal 2005. The graph shows that the current average age of school buildings in the state run from approximately 40 years old in some counties, where other counties have an average that exceeds the statewide average of 24 years by as much as 11 years. The final exhibit, Exhibit 15, on page 23, shows IAC's new maintenance rating assessment by LEA. I note that DLS concurs with the PAYO allowance and the GO bond allowances and suggests restoring language from the fiscal 22 capital bill for the non-public Aging Schools Program. This ends my presentation, and I stand for questions.
So I thank you for that analysis. Any questions? Okay. Thank you very much. We'll now turn it over to the Interagency Commission on School Construction. Mr. Gorell, come on up, and if you want to introduce your team with you, and then go ahead and start.
Thank you, Chair Zucker. I'm Bob Gorell, Executive Director of the Interagency Commission on School Construction. Cassandra Viscara at the end is the Deputy Director of the Administration. Fred is he is the Chief of the MSDE School Facilities Group, and he's here to also help us answer any questions. Alex Donahue is the Deputy Director of Field Operations, and Arabia Davis to my left here is also works in she's our funding programs manager and works in administration and field operations both. Thank you. Before we respond to the analysis, and thank you, Laura, always, for a great analysis, and we want to tell you a little bit about the things that we've been doing at the IAC. In Arabia, we'll begin with that, and with a recap of FY22. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon. In fiscal year 2022, the IAC approved 91 projects, including 36 major construction projects, 2 kindergarten projects, and 53 systemic projects with a state share of almost $370 million through the Capital Improvement Program, including funding added on through the Enrollment Growth and Relocatable Classroom Program. The IC also allocated an additional $105 million that included $40 million in federal ARPA funding through the Healthy School Facility Fund to projects that improve the health of Maryland school facilities. The program funded more than $18 million to correct unreliable or insufficient air conditioning, $31 million to correct unreliable or insufficient heating, $5 million for temperature regulation, close to $40 million for roof projects, a little more than $1.1 million to address lead remediation. Funding was also provided for indoor air quality and window replacements. A survey of the LEAs recently conducted by the IEC reported that 98% of public schools in Maryland have air conditioning systems, and this is up from only 78% in 2004. Currently, 21 of the 24 school systems report air conditioning in all of their classrooms. Only Baltimore County, Baltimore City, and Garrett have schools remaining. There are currently 27 schools that have classrooms without air conditioning. These LEAs report that within 3 years, the number will be reduced to 10. 4 in Baltimore City and are used only as swing space and are planned for disposal. 1 is in Garrett and may not need air conditioning due to the climate and the geographical area. 5 are in Baltimore County, but the vast majority of classrooms in those schools are air conditioned. The county reports that after 3 years, only 9 classrooms and 5 schools will remain without air conditioning. Now I'll turn it over to Alex to talk about the Built to Learn program.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. The Built to Learn Act took effect almost a year ago, and the IAC and the Maryland Stadium Authority have been working diligently since that time to implement its requirements. On July 23, 2021, the IAC and MSA approved a program memorandum of understanding as required by the law. Following that MOU, the IAC has been reviewing and approving projects which occur on a rolling basis rather than annually like the IAC's other programs. Including approvals made at the IAC's February meeting, the IAC has approved more than $670 million in projects for funding through the Built to Learn Act. And now Cassandra will respond to the budget analysis recommendations.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. You all received our written testimony. I don't want to repeat that to you. It was fairly brief. Fortunately, my remarks will be even more brief. The DLS analysts made 5 recommendations. The IAC concurs with all 5 of them, and we are happy to stand for questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your response. Any questions from the committee? All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, members.
Appreciate your time. I don't think anyone else has signed up for this budget, so we'll move on to the Department of Housing and Community Development. We'll first start with the analyst, Emily Haskell. Ms. Haskell, start whenever you're ready.
Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, my name is Emily Haskell, and I'll be presenting the capital budget analysis for the Department of Housing and Community Development. This chart in front of you shows the Capital Improvement Program, or CIP, for DHCD by year. As you can see, funding for DHCD's 14 capital programs in fiscal 2023 increases significantly compared to fiscal 2022. And general funds are used in place of general obligation bonds for almost all programs, with the exception of $3 million in GO bonds for the Shelter and Transitional Housing Facilities Grant Program. The overall increase in funding is partly due to the availability of federal funds for broadband initiatives, but also due to one-time increases across many of DHCD's capital programs, particularly homeownership programs and neighborhood business works. Notably, this chart does not include funding from Supplemental Budget Number 1, which had nearly $80 million in PAYGO federal funds for homeowner and business assistance, which I'll talk about later. Excluding broadband and other federal funds from the American Rescue Plan, funding for all other DHCD programs increases by $34 million compared to the current year appropriation. This page shows the DLS recommendations, which are to concur with the allowance for PAYGO, approve the 1 general obligation bond authorization, and also approve the deauthorization of $9 million in GO bonds for broadband due to the availability of federal funds. Exhibit 1 shows a comparison of this year's CIP with last year's for the 4 years of overlap, excluding broadband. This year's CIP is about a third higher. However, it's important to note that the CIP rarely reflects the funding level provided for DHCD programs. Exhibit 2 shows that the proposed allowance for state funds has exceeded the planned amount for the last several years by about $40 million on average, and funding is generally further increased through legislative actions. Home ownership programs see the biggest increase in funding in fiscal 2023, with funding going up by $16 million to a total of $42 million in fiscal 2023. This increase is funded partially with higher special fund revenues, but there's also There's also an increase of $5 million in other state funds. And Exhibit 4 shows the recent increase in activity in DHCD's homeownership programs beginning in fiscal 2020. In fiscal 2021, the Maryland Mortgage Program financed nearly 4,000 mortgages, and the capital appropriations supported down payment assistance for more than 3,000 households. DHCD is also administering the Homeowner Assistance Fund that was created through the American Rescue Plan. Maryland received nearly $250 million for the program, all administered by DHCD. Exhibit 5 shows DHCD's plan for allocating these funds, with 77% going to grant and loan programs for low-income households. The loan portion is in DHCD's capital budget, with $67 million in the current year appropriation and $65 million added through supplemental budget number 1 for fiscal 2023. And the applications for these grant and loan programs opened this past December. Funding for rental housing programs totals $67.5 million in fiscal 2023, which is level with the current year. Last year, the department submitted an assessment of Maryland's housing needs, and Exhibit 6, shown on the screen, is part of that report and shows that the shortage of affordable rental units is particularly acute at the lowest income levels of less than 30% of the area median income. DHCD's rental housing programs typically fund projects providing housing for households up to 60% of area median income. Exhibit 7 shows the rental housing units created and preserved through DHCD funding. Increasing construction costs have been a factor in how many units the funding supports, and DLS has asked the department to comment on the impact of rising costs on projects financing and on the mix of new units produced versus preserved with the rental housing appropriation. Next, I'll turn to the State Small Business Credit Initiative. Maryland is receiving nearly $200 million from the American Rescue Plan to provide access to capital for small and underserved businesses. This funding includes a set-aside for businesses owned by socially and economically disadvantaged individuals, as well as an incentive allocation that can be used after achieving goals for lending to such businesses. The supplemental budget included $21 million in PAYGO funds and DHCD for the program. DHCD, Commerce, and TEDCO will jointly administer Maryland's program, and DLS has asked DHCD to comment on plans for this funding, including how it is expected to be divided between the 3 agencies. DHCD also administers some disaster relief funding, mostly through Neighborhood Business Works. Previously, the department provided loans to businesses in Ellicott City that were impacted by flooding, and in January, the Board of Public Works authorized forgiveness for the outstanding loan balances. In October, DHCD also received $3.8 million from the Catastrophic Event Account to provide grants to both businesses and residents impacted by Hurricane Ida. As of February, only 6 businesses had applied for a total of $300,000. DLS has asked DHCD to comment on the anticipated timeline for making grants and when any unused funds are expected to be returned to the Catastrophic Event Account. Lastly, I'm going to talk about broadband, and some of this will sound familiar for those of you who are also on HHS, as this issue also appeared in DHCD's operating budget analysis. For both operating and capital, the state has allocated $400 million from the American Rescue Plan for broadband programs across the fiscal 2021 to 2023 budgets. And DHCD is also expected to receive at least $100 million from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. The fiscal 2023 allowance includes about $170 million in PAYGO federal funds in the dedicated purpose account for broadband. And in fiscal 2022, there's a negative deficiency in the dedicated purpose account to shift some of those funds to fiscal 2023. But there's still about $200 million available in fiscal 2022 across the dedicated purpose account and DHCD's budget for broadband. Exhibit 8 shows all the different broadband programs DHCD is administering. The top portion of the chart is primarily capital programs, while lower down, the affordability and adoption section is primarily in the operating budget. Connect Maryland, on the first line of this chart, is the largest component of DHCD's broadband programs and funds the construction of new networks to large unserved areas of the state. The fiscal 2022 application window for this program closed with over $250 million in requests, which are now being reviewed. DHCD expects to announce the awards in April, and depending on the amount awarded, may decide not to open a separate round of applications for fiscal 2023. On the third line, you can see a new program to provide service to residents of public housing with $45 million provided in fiscal 2022. This funding will be awarded to local jurisdictions and is expected to open for applications soon. Moving ahead, Exhibit 10 shows funding that will be available from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act for broadband. The largest pot of money is the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, or BEAD, which has a $100 million state minimum and will primarily fund larger infrastructure projects. The next program is the State Digital Equity Capacity Grant, which has a state minimum of $1.5 million annually. The program will include an initial planning grant for states to develop plans to ensure internet access for disadvantaged populations. The next few programs are competitive grant programs for both digital inclusion and infrastructure projects. And then the last program is a federal monthly subsidy for households' broadband bills, which DHCD is currently supplementing through the Maryland Emergency Broadband Benefit, funded with $45 million in the current year's operating budget. Finally, Exhibit 11 is trying to get at the need for broadband programs across the state, reflecting both lack of infrastructure as well as other access issues. It shows a rough map of the state with the percent of households with no internet access, based on results from the American Community Survey. Chapter 74 of 2021 charged the Office of Statewide Broadband with creating a statewide plan by July 1st of this year to work toward ensuring all Marylanders have access to affordable and reliable broadband by 2026. The office is working with Salisbury University and the Eastern Shore Regional GIS Cooperative to develop the plan, as well as completing the mapping needed to better understand the needs across the state. And these maps are expected to be available later this year. That concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Well, thank you very much. Any questions for Ms. Haskell? Okay, thank you very much. Secretary Holt, come on up. If you want to bring up members of your team. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Mr. Vice Chair. Members of the committee, my name is Ken Holt. I'm Secretary of the Maryland Department of Housing and Community Development. With me is Robin Chaconis on my left and Abdul Sulla, who is our Robin, our Chief of Staff, and Abdul, our Director of the Division of Finance and Administration. Thank you, Emily. Great job. And thanks to my team here, which are behind me, because they've done a great job too. It's been an extraordinary time for our department. As you can tell, a lot of money has been flowing through us out to needy Marylanders, and I think we've done a great job efficiently getting money out the door. We've been attentive to fraud and very, very protective of the federal and the state assets. So I think fundamentally, we support all of the analysts' recommendations. There were 3 items that she had brought up that she'd like a response to. The first one relates to our rental housing program and sort of the impacts of cost inflation on rental housing production. It's a substantial problem, and we would like to address it. Generally, we find a sort of a gap filler that we need to provide through rental housing program funds of about $2.5 million through our typical projects. We believe that the inflation costs have driven that up to about $3.5 million of additional gap filler. So this is going to drive costs dramatically higher across all of our applicants. We have about 70 that are either 4% or 9% applications. These projects will likely require in excess of $100 million of additional help because of these cost increases. So I think that we respectfully request all of the support that you can deliver to help us address these inflationary costs. With respect to the State Small Business Credit Initiative, a federal program funded through DHCD with about $187 million, there's an additional incentive that will provide maybe an added $10 or $11 million if we meet certain benchmarks of performance. We have teamed with the Department of Commerce and the TEDCO, the Technology and Education Development Commission. Apologies to Troy for maybe not getting the name correct. The relationship has been really very effective in working through with U.S. Treasury all the terms and conditions. We were the first plan submitted to Treasury, and I think we've sort of guided their understanding about lending into distressed areas and effectively getting capital out the door, whether it's through venture debt or equity investment. And we will retain about $97 million. TEDCO will receive about $47 million, and the Department of Commerce about $42 million. This is in line with their request to us, and the money will be awarded to us from Treasury in 3 tranches. The first tranche, basically 33% of each of our total entitlement. And based upon successful performance in distributing the money, we will then release additional tranches. We also are going to be dealing closely with community development finance institutions, which CDFIs, which are really in the business of providing support to distressed communities. So we have some, we have one in Baltimore Community Lending. There are not very many around the state, but there are a few that we are working closely with. So some of this money will probably be awarded to subrecipients that will be CDFIs. And then the final question related to disaster relief and catastrophic event assistance. We did receive 6 applications, 4 from Anne Arundel County, 1 from Cecil, and 1 from Montgomery County. We have roughly $3.8 million available. We do not believe that we'll use the entire amount. It will be returned to the catastrophic event fund. However, we don't have clear understanding of what the extent of the applications will require. Most of the damage was covered by insurance, so we're still in a process of discovery with respect to what the total amount will be, but nonetheless, any unused funds will be returned. So with that, that concludes my comments, and I look forward to answering any questions from the committee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. Vice Chair McCray.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Mr. Secretary. Just, I guess, let me lean in first by saying thank you for the work that you all do, your agency do. There were 2 pieces of narrative that was put in last year, and I want to just, my questions surround around the narrative piece of it. In the narrative that you talked about with community input on projects, and it gave certain programs that you all produce out of your respective agencies, it highlighted things that you were doing with local government, and I don't want to like get into subliminal questions in reference to how do you communicate with state folks, but I do have a piece of legislation that deals with wrapping in the notification that you send to local government about these projects to also the respective districts that the projects are happening in. I just want to get an understanding if you have a problem with wrapping in the respective delegates and senators as you let the executive of local jurisdictions
We have no problem with respect to notice. No problem with respect to notice.
Yes, sir. I appreciate that, too. The second one is in reference to the MBW loan process activity. And this one's a little bit more interesting, Mr. Secretary, because I know that I sent the letter December 10th, 2020, in reference to an issue that was brought to me that went unresponded to, which is why I then had the committee narrative placed inside of the capital budget for your respective agency. Unfortunately, it wasn't obtained October 1st when it was due. It was just retained February 10th, which is like less than 30 days ago. The issue that was brought to me was in reference to one of the minority folks that were a benefactor of the MBW program said that their interest rate was 7%, 7.5%, but was concerned because other folks that fall under other ethnicities, meaning white folks, that their percentage was about 2%. And I just wanted to get an understanding, because you all may be well within your right as an agency in reference to how you calculated or how that person was charged. But then when I read the document that you all submitted, it stated that for all loans, loan interest for 2016, when the average loan had an interest, was 0.75%. 2012, the average was as high as 2.63%. And when excluding interest-free loans, a decade low of 3.38%, and then in a high of 2020, 5.25%. So none of them really gauged to the point of 7 to 7.5. So I just wanted to understand, like, what is the process when a person complains and they gets one of these loans and don't feel as though that they're getting the level of fair treatment? And how do you all audit in reference to making sure that when we're paying attention to the percentages of the interest rates that's allocated, that we're doing our due service?
Well, thank you for the question. Clearly, we want to make certain that there's equity and fairness across all the rates of interest that we charge, both on residential mortgages or on business loans. I think, you know, the fundamental analysis that goes into business lending is going to be based upon the collateral that's provided, the amount of money that's being invested by the property owner or the business owner into the business, the history and track record, the business pro forma. There's a variety of, I would say, objective metrics that go into determining the level of risk. And clearly, some loans, and this isn't based whatsoever on the ethnicity of the borrower. This is all based upon the viability of the business model and the amount of collateral that's presented as part of the package. You know, the ranges, I mean, what you've cited to me, frankly, I'm not really familiar with. I would say that our levels of interest that we charge are very, very consistent, and the range might fall between 4.5% and 8%. Nothing below 4.5% for sure on a business loan, and nothing above 8% during our period of time and during the interest rate environment that we're in. I would say that 7% or 7 and change is a very, very reasonable rate of interest for a business that maybe has not brought in the amount of collateral that would lower the cost of debt service. So I believe that a examination of the underwriting would be satisfactory to you. I think you'd realize that it was a fair and accurate interest rate that was imposed on that particular loan. And I do not see dramatic changes of cost of capital, certainly not across race or ethnicity. There's no question in my mind. It's all driven by the business model itself, the amount of collateral brought on the table, the amount of personal capital that can be invested by the business owner.
And Secretary Hall, I'm going to take my questions offline because they weren't answered. I'm going to repeat them because I thought they were very simple questions. When a person has a complaint, what's the process in reference to who do they go to? Because I know that I tried to follow one process and
I'm sorry, I didn't get that question from your initial question. I didn't hear that.
That's how I ended. And the second part of the question was, do you all audit this piece of it? So like, what's the process when you have it? That was my question. I was lining up everything to get to the question. And then the second part is, how do you all audit these types of things when people do bring these legitimate issues to you?
Well, when concerns are brought to the department, they're brought really directly to me. And we have a business lending division which will evaluate through an underwriting process any kind of problems that are raised. And if you're saying that there was not a timely response, I'm not aware of that.
I'm gonna take it offline to Secretary Holt, just in respect to the committee, and I'm gonna make sure that we loop back in so that I can bring that that specific incident back to your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Secretary, when the Vice Chair calls, you guys will, I'm sure, give him the response that the quickness of the response that reason why he put in language.
We're always responsive to the Vice Chair.
Good. Good, well, let's keep that up then. Senator Elfreth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, particularly to you and your team on the response with Hurricane Ida. I greatly appreciate it. My constituents appreciate it. On the rental housing projects, and I realize they're not here, but the analyst was kind enough to reference some of the challenges ahead, and you referenced our purchasing power of $2.5 million has gone down significantly, particularly in the last couple of years, while rising supply chain issues, all of that. Is there a plan in the department to increase? I believe it is internal policy that you can increase 2.5 to say 3.5. Understanding this would cover fewer projects, but it would cover more of a project and help leverage that out on the private market. Is that on the table?
Well, we intend to increase from 2.5 to 3.5 million.
Okay.
Yes. We don't want to reduce the number of projects.
Obviously.
They're extremely important.
Right.
I mean, there's information in your packets that deal with the deficit of affordable housing,
Yes.
and it ranges anywhere from 85,000 units to 135,000 units, depending upon who's done the analysis. So clearly, we want to build as much, and as I said in my statement, there are about 70 units or projects that we've received applications for and that are in process. We'd like to support every single one of them.
Right.
We need additional funding in order to close the gap and construct those projects.
It's about the time of year where you announce the awards, or did I miss that?
No, we're about to announce a new round, a 9% round. Our 4% rounds are sort of continuous
Okay.
throughout the year. Our 9%, probably March.
It's out right now.
It's out right now?
Okay, it's out right now.
Applications are due in May.
I'm sorry, it's the applications are out, or the announcement of awards?
The announcement of the round being available
Okay.
has been already announced, and the
Okay.
applications are due in May. And then it'll probably take 3 months or so for processing those applications.
Okay.
We hope to announce September, October.
Did I miss this latest round, whether it's the 4% or the 9%, but you typically, around like December, January, am I correct, announce?
We did
awards?
announce.
Okay.
And I don't know what, Greg, there were 3 awards?
Okay.
Yeah.
23, and what is the demand for those?
Incredible
awards?
demand.
Yeah.
I don't know in dollars, Greg?
Yeah, on average, like, last time we opened the round, we received 51 applications.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we were only able to fund a small portion of those.
And at 2.5 million?
We received 52 and we awarded 22 or 3.
Okay. I'd love, if you could get that list to the committee. I know affordable housing is a priority of everybody here, and we want to help you achieve greater unit.
Absolutely, thank you, appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Mr. Secretary, there's a Claudia Wilson Randall. Is she with you? No? Okay,
She's from CDN.
no problem. Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. I don't know if Claudia Wilson Randall is here? Okay. All right, well, thank you very much. We'll now move on to the last agency of the evening. It's the Maryland Department of Emergency Management. We'll start with Madeline Miller. Thank you, Secretary Holt. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Madeline, and today I'll be presenting the Maryland Department of Emergency Management's capital budget. This is the first capital hearing for the department, which was created this past fall on October 1st by Chapter 287 of 2021. There are 2 components which I will be addressing today, and I'm going to start with the construction project. There's 1 construction project recommended for funding in the CIP, the headquarters renovation and expansion. The fiscal 2023 request for this project is approximately $9.1 million in general obligation bond funding. I'm going to jump forward to page 3, where more detailed information is provided about the department's headquarters, located on the Camp Frederick Military Reservation in Baltimore County. This project first appeared in the Military's Department CIP when the Maryland Emergency Management Agency was located there. Since the facility's construction in 2001, the now MDEM has taken on a variety of additional responsibilities and outgrown the aging space. In addition to the department's expanded programming scope and personnel, poor roofing and groundwater infiltration has resulted in the presence of mold in the HVAC system. The renovations and expansion will provide staff with improved office, conference room, restroom, break room, and billeting spaces. Billeting spaces are required to accommodate staff needs during emergency activations. Renovations will also address the HVAC system and repairs to the parking lot. The project is expected to cost $23.1 million in GO bond funding, and the department reports that construction is expected to begin in July. In addition to the fiscal 2023 funding for this project, pre-authorizations are provided in the capital budget bill for fiscal 2024 and 2025. The $10.3 million fiscal 2024 pre-authorization for the project is required so that the Board of Public Works can approve the construction contract without authorization of all funds necessary to fund the contract. DLS recommends approving GO bond funding for the headquarters project in fiscal 23 and approving pre-authorizations for the project in fiscal 24 and 2025. Flipping back to the cover page, there's also $25 million in PAYGO general funds for the Resilient Maryland Revolving Loan Fund. Last year, $25 million of GO bond funding was authorized for this revolving loan fund. The current Maryland Consolidated Capital Bond Loan deauthorizes those funds, however, and replaces them with PAYGO general funds. This program, the Resilient Maryland Revolving Loan Fund, will provide low or no interest loans to local governments and nonprofit organizations to fund local resilience projects and satisfy the non-federal match for federal mitigation grants. The fund was established in response to the passage of the Federal Safeguarding Tomorrow Through Ongoing Risk Mitigation Act that authorizes FEMA to provide capitalization grants to states. The program has been scoped following the best practices provided by the Maryland Department of the Environment, which manages a water quality revolving loan fund. DLS asked that MDEM update the Budget Committee today on the program's activities to date and its planned activities in fiscal 2022 and 2023. Then the Department of Legislative Services recommends concurring with the use of PAYGO funds and approving the deauthorization of fiscal 2022 GO bond funding, shown further down on this page. That concludes my analysis, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Okay, thank you very much. We'll now turn to the agency. Acting Secretary Strickland, if you, I know that you have a bunch of concurs, so we've got that, and then if you just want to answer the questions about the programs, and we'll get you on your way. I know you're doing important business these days.
Okay, well, I appreciate that very much, Mr. Chair and Mr. Vice Chair. I do have with me to my left our deputy, who is Chaz Eby, and to my right is our Director for Mission Support, Janet Moncrief, and then to her right is Jeremy Scheinecker, who is our Facilities Manager. So as you said, we basically concur with all the recommendations. The questions that were asked are in relationship to the revolving loan fund. We are in the process of working closely with the Treasurer's Office, as well as other experts who have had some involvement in this type of a fund before, and trying to get it set up, basically. And with that, at the same time, we're closely monitoring the STORM Act, which is the federal program that will replenish or put money into this particular revolving account. At this point in time, FEMA has not released any guidance on that, so we're closely monitoring that because we don't want to get caught such that we're sitting here holding our money and not able to distribute it. So we are staying on top of it. We're just working our way through the bureaucracy with it all.
Great. Any other questions?
I'd be happy to answer any questions.
All right. I think we're all good, Mr. Secretary. Appreciate your time.
Okay.
Thank you. Keep up the great work. With that, committee, that ends today's budget hearings on Capitol. We're adjourned.